Seeing him in front of her, the girl said in surprise, "The head of the abyssal." Seeing this behavior, which he was extremely displeased with, Yu Heng spoke angrily. "Didn't you see my brother here?" After making this accusation to the girl, Yu Hyun spoke to her. "How dare you attack?" She replied angrily. "I stopped. What's the problem?" Seeing this brewing fight, Yujin said in alarm, "Oh, it's Jupiter's head." Continuing to blame the girl for her rashness and carelessness, Yu Hyun said, "Even if you are in a quarrel, couldn't you just not give in to provocation? Your character is uncomplicated, which is reflected in your attacks." Continuing to be rude to the girl, Han Yu Hyun said, "They are so obvious that even a child can dodge them." Hearing these words, the girl spoke to Yu Hyun in a threatening voice. "What did you just say?" After saying this, the girl clutched her spear tightly in her hands and noticed Han Yu Hyun pulling his sword out of its sheath and said angrily, "You're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." No sooner had she said this than she struck Han Yu Hyun, which he managed to deflect. Crossing her weapons in the fight, she shouted angrily at the boy, "Since we're already here, why don't we have some fun?" Watching this fight, Han Yu Heng exclaimed, "Yu Heng, Hyun Ah, please stop them, Chairman of Jupiter. Why do they keep provoking each other?" Hearing Han Yu-jin's frightened words, Song Hyun said, "It can't be helped." Watching Han Yu-jin and Moon Hyun Ah fight, Song Hyun said, "S-classes fight alone, not in groups. But nowadays, dungeon breakthroughs don't happen so often." With a thoughtful pose and a finger on his beard, Song Hyun said with a sly expression, "Since they're all here." As he watched the two high-level hunters fight, the Jupiter Guild leader spoke thoughtfully, as if he was happy about it. "This is a perfect opportunity to get into each other's necks." Hearing Song Hyun say that, Han Yu-jin was surprised to hear that, and exclaimed in confusion, "What?" Kim Seong-han, on the other hand, did not seem surprised at all, as if he had known that it would turn out this way. Watching his brother and Moon Hyun-ah fight, Han Yu-jin thought, "It took me a long time to convince Park Aram and Song Han to come with me. So I was very surprised that the leaders of the other guilds easily agreed, even though I didn't reveal my true purpose." After reflecting on this topic, Han Yu-jin finally came to the truth, and he said in his head, "Now I understand exactly why they cannot go into the dungeon together." And while the guild leaders were having a showdown and settling their differences, Park Aram continued to clear the dungeon. After destroying another golem, she said happily, "Oh, I got the big one." Taking the crystal out of the monster and sighing with relief, she said happily, "I was allowed to collect magic stones here. I'll sell them, pay for all the expenses on the ice tree spear, and buy new equipment." As she was saying this, the girl suddenly heard a strange roar and the sound of blows not far from her. Turning her head to the left, she saw a pile of dust rise and said in surprise, "What?" Looking at Han Yu-hyun struggling with Moon Hyun-ah, she said angrily, "What are they doing up there besides hunting?" Watching the fierce fight from the mountain, Han Yu-jin grabbed his head in embarrassment, trying to think of a way to remedy the situation. Terrified by what was happening below, Han Yu-jin exclaimed in alarm, "What should we do? They've really decided to fight." Hearing this, Kim Sung-han spoke to him in a sad voice, trying to talk him out of it. "It's not safe, Yu-jin." Hearing these words from Kim Seong-han, Han Yu-jin was confused. "Are we even able to stop them?" Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Moon Hyun-ah shouted out to Han Yu-jin, "I didn't know you could use the blue leaves of the willow tree like this." As she swung her spear at Han Yu-jin and tried to hurt him with it, she exclaimed, "I cannot be stopped by a miserable leaf." Protecting Han Yu-jin with his shield so that the blast waves from the blows would not harm him, he could not be distracted for a moment, and Han Yu-jin was thinking, someone might get hurt if things continue at this rate. Covering himself with his hands as well, due to his body's defense reaction, even though he was being protected by Kim Sung-han, Han Yu-jin thought in confusion, "But how can I, an F-class, do that?" After thinking of a clever way, Han Yu-jin suddenly groaned heavily. Hearing this, Han Yu-hyun abruptly rushed over to him, exclaiming, "Hen, are you okay?" Seeing that his opponent had fled the battlefield, the girl exclaimed in surprise, "Hey!" Running to his older brother, Han Yu-hyun nervously spoke to Yu-jin, holding him in his arms. "You inhaled smoke? I'm sorry, it's my fault. Does it sting your nose?" Seeing Hyun's reaction, Yu-jin exclaimed in surprise, "What?" Climbing onto the rock after Han Yu-hyun, the girl said in irritation, "Hey, we were just fighting, where are you going?" Hearing this, Yu-heng turned to her and said in displeasure, "My hen is here, be careful." Hearing this, the girl said in surprise, "What? Be careful?" Hearing Han Yu-hyun say that, the girl mockingly said, "Did you hear him, Song Hyun-jae? If only Director Song could see him now." Holding a handkerchief up to Yu-jin's nose, Yu-hyun said, "Blow your nose, Hyun." Seeing this reaction from his brother, Yu-jin thought, "There is another way. It's a little clumsy, but..." Falling to the ground, Yu-jin clutched his head and exclaimed, "Oh my god, I'm dying because I'm just a weak F-class." Hearing that he was dying, Yu-hyun exclaimed in fright, "Hyun!" And then Jin continued, The naughty S classes started fighting and scared me, the poor F class. I already had a stomachache, and now I won't be able to sleep because of the stress, and I'll cry because of the stress. And there's not even a doctor here, standing in the back, watching the scene. Moon Hyun-ah said in embarrassment. Oh, have these F classes always been so weak? Hearing this, Yoo Hyun exclaimed in anger. I'm sorry, Hyung Nim. It seems we were too cruel. Pointing his finger at Mir and Song Han, Han Yoo Hyun said, Of course, you should be ashamed of yourselves. Even Kim Sung Han and Mir are better behaved. As he bowed his head to Jin along with Song Han and Hyun-ah, Yoo Hyun said, Let's not get distracted so that we can get this over with and get out of here. You're not children. Stop fighting. This way. Line up. Han Yoo-jin took out his cap with the letter F on it and put it on his head, and also took out a whistle. The very next moment, he climbed on his world, raised his hand and whistled, giving orders to everyone in front of him. Hen A, the golems are yours for 3 hours. Song Hyun Jae, inspect the perimeter. Han Yoo-jin was like a real coach when he gave orders to the S classes, and he said loudly, To this building. You go too, Yoo Hyun. Hearing Han Yoo-jin's instructions, Song Hyun Jae said in surprise, This is something new. As Han Yoo-jin watched everyone go in different directions in accordance with his orders, he spoke to Kim Seong-han. Oh, I had to separate them so that they wouldn't fight again. While giving orders, Han Yoo-jin saw his new skill, which was called and described as follows. Terrifying Chicken Commander, SS. A teacher who controls stubborn awakened ones. Kids are so naughty, aren't they? Don't worry if you use this skill. Seeing such a strange skill, Han Yoo-jin cried out in surprise. Huh? What is this? And what's with the name of the skill and its description? Meanwhile, somewhere in the system administrator's room, a girl with horns said, It's beautiful. What kind of question is that? To which the mermaid, grabbing her by the horns, said, Shall I cut off your horn or your finger? Meanwhile, in the dungeon where Han Yoo-jin was, Kim Sung-hyun brought him hot coffee and said, Drink this. We will stay here for the night. Hearing this, Yoo-jin replied, Oh yes, thank you. Observing the frantic pace of the dungeon clearing thanks to the S classes, Kim Sung-han said, If we continue at this pace, we can get out of here tomorrow. Hearing this, Yoo-jin added, Yeah, that's really incredible. Han Yoo-jin looked up and said in surprise, It's convenient to rest here because of these buildings. Do you think there was a castle here, or a church? Hearing this, Kim Sung-han said after thinking about it, I'm not sure. I haven't found any documents yet. Drinking the hot coffee that Kim Sung-han brought him, Han Yoo-jin looked around the neighborhood and said thoughtfully, A ruined city. As he said this, he thought sharply about it all. According to the system, these are traces of another fallen world, where they couldn't cope with the growing number of dungeons. Looking at the ruins left behind by this world when it failed to hold back the monsters from the dungeons, Han Yoo-jin thought it was because of those who wanted to increase their influence by using them. Recalling what else he had seen and imagining his destroyed world, Yoo-jin suddenly thought, Will we also meet such an end if we don't deal with the dungeons? Can we stop them with 50 S classes? Thinking about how these S classes work as a group, Han Yoo-jin thought in confusion with these uncontrollable people. While thinking about this, everyone had already gathered around the campfire that had been set up at the campsite to keep them warm. Sitting by the fire, Park Aram shouted out in anger, You're all too angry! You're taking away all the fun! I want to fight too! Hearing such discontent from Aram, Yoo-jin spoke to her. Please, Aram, at least you... Hearing Park Aram's offended words, Han Yoo-hyun said to her, You don't have enough experience, skills, or equipment. Who can you handle? To which she replied angrily, What? Not enough experience and equipment? Having said that, the girl later added, You'll see. I'll buy a new one after I sell the stones, and I'll smash you all. Hearing this, Moon Hyun-ah said to her, Oh, was that why you were so diligent in collecting stones that you got soot all over your face? As Moon Hyun-ah walked by, Han Yoo-jin spoke to her. Oni, the ends of your hair are burnt, look. When Moon Hyun-ah noticed this, she exclaimed in confusion. Wow, really? Oh, Song Hyun Jae, was that you? Or is it the head? Looking at her burnt hair tips, Moon Hyun-ah said in a sad voice, Oh, the old farts will be grumbling again. Hearing this, Park Aram said in surprise, Just cut your hair. Isn't it too long to hinder your hunting? Hearing Park Aram's advice, Moon Hyun-ah said to her happily, Yes, but I need it for advertising. And those old men who sponsor my guild. After saying this, Moon Hyun-ah spun around and said happily, They say I should stay graceful since I'm an S-class female hunter. Hearing this, Park Aram made a silly face and said in surprise, What does this have to do with hunting? As she threw her arms around Park Aram, Moon Hyun-ah spoke to her happily. Good question, my gifted child. Grow up doing what you want to do, and don't worry about such things. Trying to get out of her mentor's arms, the girl struggled to speak. I can't breathe. With her elbow on Park Aram's head, Moon Hyun-ah spoke to her with a heavy sigh. Huh, sometimes dungeons are even more comfortable. As Moon Hyun-ah hugged her child, she turned her attention to the leader of the Jupiter Guild, who was drinking tea, and said, I'm sorry. I wish I could kill all these old men. Should we become as independent as you? Hearing this question from Moon Hyun-ah, Song Hyun-jae looked at her, but did not look up from his tea, elegantly holding his cup, and said, You don't have to be on a leash all the time. Continuing his speech about changes in the future, Song Hyun-jae added, They only think about profit. That was the reason for the incident at the ISS. After finishing his tea party, the leader of the Jupiter Guild raised his head proudly and said in a thoughtful tone, Besides, those who know nothing about high-end dungeons won't be able to understand us. As he shared his thoughts on the matter, Song Hyun-jae also added in the end, And they can't consider us the same species when they are so far behind. Hearing these words from the head of the Jupiter Guild, Han Yu-jin thought fiercely, because he realized something. It didn't sound like that in his head. After what I saw in the dungeons, I began to understand. Thinking back to that battle between Han Yu-hyun and Moon Hyun-ah, he thought, S-classes are much stronger than ordinary people, for days or even weeks or months. Predators rule over monsters from other worlds. Thinking about how different a world S-class people live in because of their strength, Han Yu-jin suddenly realized, However, my brother... At the same time, Moon Hyun-ah, who was spending time with everyone around the campfire, spoke happily, Young master is full of surprises. Observing Han Yu-hyun's behavior, she also added in amazement, I no longer recognize him when he's with Han Yu-hengning. Hearing such words from more than one person, Han Yu-jin looked at his younger brother and thought in surprise, Then Yu-heng, he's holding back. Looking at his younger brother, who was sitting in front of the fire without saying a word of objection and simply bowed his head, Yu-jin thought, Isn't it because he's good? Looking at his lonely brother, who was far away from the rest of the company, Yu-jin decided to intervene in his loneliness and thought, Is he not doing what he wants to do because his brother is an F-class student? It's all because of me. When Han Yu-jin noticed his older brother slowly approaching him from behind, he spoke in surprise. What is it, Yu-jin? Looking at his elder brother, Han Yu-hyun spoke to him. Are you tired? You don't look good. Hearing this question, Yu-jin quickly answered him, No, just a little bit. Hearing this conversation between the two brothers, Kim Seong-han said in alarm, You should get some rest, Yu-jin. Hearing that Han Yu-hyun was tired, Park Aram called out to him, throwing a pillow with a toy at him. I'll give you this. Go to sleep, Ajusi. After that, Moon Hyun also threw a sleeping bag at the boy and added, That's right, Hyung Nim. Take this sleeping bag. Feeling so cared for, Han Yu-jin said to them in confusion. Oh no, what about you? To which he heard Park Aram reply, We are S-classes. One night is not a big deal. Also looking at him with a smile, Moon Hyun-ah added, Yeah, we'll continue to clear the dungeon. After saying that, she also added, We'll hunt in pairs and take turns. Hearing these confident words from them and being surprised at their organization and friendship, Yu-jin happily exclaimed, Friends! But suddenly his tone changed to a menacing one. Then Han Yu-jin looked at them with a penetrating gaze and said menacingly, You did not divide into two to fight, did you? Hearing Han Yu-jin say this, everyone felt uneasy. After saying this, Yu-jin added, Aram, I can see it. You're wearing a whole bunch of mana potions. Hearing this, the girl replied in embarrassment, Oh, it's just because I'm hungry? Han Yu-jin also noticed the changes in the other hunters, and he spoke in irritation. Why did you change your gloves, Song Hyun-jae? And Yu-hyun was sharpening his knife all the time. Hearing these questions, Yu-hyun replied in confusion. That's... Hearing Han Yu-jin's words, Moon Hyun-ah presented Sung Hyun with a presentation. We were caught because of your equipment. Hearing this, Yu-jin said sternly, Hunt the monsters. Don't do anything else. After saying this and climbing into his sleeping bag, Yu-jin added, If I see you fighting, I'll tell Yu Meng. Hearing this, Park Aram exclaimed in confusion, No, Ajusi, this is my only equipment. Hearing this embarrassed voice of Aram's, Han Yu-jin climbed into his sleeping bag and said, Then just don't fight. And then, closing his eyes, he thought, Ugh, it's hard enough with 4, but I need 50. As Han Yu-jin closed his eyes and prepared to go to sleep, he suddenly thought, Can I even trust the system? But, well, yes. At this point, I have no other choice. Lying in his warm sleeping bag and looking up at the starry sky, Han Yu-jin was deep in thought about his goal. Even if I move forward in small steps, maybe I can reach 50 and save the world. After these thoughts, Han Yu-jin fell asleep. Although this dream was partly good, it turned into a nightmare for him. After falling asleep, they were already in the future, where they had reached the boss of the dungeon. Standing in front of him, everyone froze in place, overwhelmed by his gigantic size. This boss was a giant lizard that had to be defeated with a single blow. But that didn't stop them, and after a short period of time, everyone was in the abyss, where Sok Shumang spoke happily, introducing a new abyssal hunter who had upgraded his class. Pointing to Kim Sung-han, Seok Shimyoung spoke happily. And with this, the abyss has a third S-class. Posing for the audience, Kim Seong-han said, S-class to victory. Happy for his friend who was able to achieve a new class, Han Yu-jin came to him to present him with a bouquet and said, Congratulations, Song-han. I look forward to working with you in... Hearing this, Kim Sung-han turned to him and looked at him with a displeased look and said, Get out of here! Hearing this strange reaction from Sun-han, Yu-jin exclaimed in surprise, Huh? Hearing the surprise in Han Yu-jin's voice, Kim Sung-han said to him in an irritated voice, From this day forward, I am leaving the abyss. S-classes have no need for comrades. When he heard him say that, he exclaimed in alarm, Huh? S-seong-han? Kim Seong-han then shouted out to Han Yu-hyun, I challenge you to a duel, underdog. The latter, revealing his blade, said, Sounds like fun. At which point Yu-jin exclaimed in fright, Yu-hyun! Hearing about this, the other S-class warriors who were also present in the guild with them also joined in, shouting with joy, Yay, we also want to come with you. To which Yu-jin exclaimed in alarm, No, come on, guys. And with that, the S-class battle began. As Yu-jin watched, he shouted out in fright, Stop it, everyone! The building might collapse! Stop it! Stop! Delirious in his sleep from the horror he had seen, Han Yu-jin woke up screaming. Sitting beside him, Kim Sung said, Mr. Han, are you okay? To which Yu-jin said in confusion, Seong-han. While still under the influence of his dream, Han Yu-jin called out to Kim Seong-han in fright, Please don't go to work for yourself, and don't get into fights just because you've become an S-class. To which the latter said in embarrassment, Calm down. Looking at his master, who had suddenly woken up and began to cry out to him in fright, Song-han added, I will continue to faithfully serve as the shield of the abyss. You were sleeping so sweetly, why did you wake up so suddenly? Realizing what had happened, Han Yu-jin, embarrassed by his actions, spoke in confusion as he scratched the back of his head. Oh, ha ha ha. So it was just a dream. Of course it was. Everyone was fighting and the building was collapsing. When Han Yu-jin woke up from his dream, he suddenly noticed a pillar of light behind him after a startled awakening, and he said to Kim Seong-han in surprise, What kind of lightning? It's not raining. Hearing this question from Yu-jin, Kim Seong-han said hesitantly, Well, you know... Han Yu-jin took a closer look at what was happening and said, I think I see a flash over there. Wait. Looking at what was happening far away from him, Han Yu-jin asked in irritation, What happened to the castle that was there? When did it... Hearing this question, Kim Seong-han replied in confusion, Well, After saying that, Han Yu-jin saw a very bright flash from Song-hyun's lightning. Seeing this, Han Yu-jin exclaimed in alarm, You've got to be kidding me! After stopping his battle, Song-hyun-jae, standing in front of Moon-hyun-ah, suddenly spoke to her. We really should get back to our work. Hearing these words, and pouring healing potions on her wound, Moon-hyun-ah replied, Then answer my question. What made you reward us with your presence? Looking at her opponent, who suggested that they stop fighting, she said to him in an excited voice, You have your eye on the elder brother of the abyssal chairman? Is that what this is all about? After saying this, the girl added, Understand that he may have valuable skills, but he's only an F-class. To which Song-hyun replied, Tisk, tisk. Never judge people by their class. Looking at his rival with a gleeful look, Song-hyun said to her with a sly smile, Can't you just have fun for once? Looking at the Destroyer Guild leader who was using a mana potion on herself, the Jupiter Guild leader spoke to her. He looks unusually fearless, that's for sure. As Song-hyun-jae continued his monologue, he saw her finish the potion and throw the bottle behind her and said, And surprisingly arrogant. As soon as the empty bottle of mana potion fell to the ground, Guild leader Jupiter added, There are so many reasons why he... But before he could finish speaking, the girl pounced on him, striking him suddenly. Although it was a lightning-fast attack, the girl was fighting the best hunter in the world, so it was not difficult to deflect it. Trying to break through Song-hyun's defense, the girl said, He is a forbidden zone. We don't want you to break our precious crystal ball while you're having fun. After repelling Moon-hyun-ah's attack and knocking her back, Guild leader Jupiter spoke to her happily. Oh, you're so indifferent to this kind of thing. I didn't expect that. Hearing Song-hyun-ji say that, Moon-hyun-ah, who was preparing to strike him again, shouted out, Shut up! After striking and breaking Song-hyun's chains, Moon-hyun-ah said to him, At least wait for your turn until I have my riding beast. As she said this, she stepped further towards Song-hyun-jin and said in an irritated voice, You've already destroyed several of your toys. And while they were arguing, Han Yu-jin had already arrived on the battlefield on his piece and exclaimed in alarm, Oh shit! Watching the battle between the two high-class hunters, Han Yu-jin said in astonishment, They're moving so fast, I can barely see them. Hearing this, Kim Seong-han, blocking his path further, said, "Please stay behind. I will try to talk to—" As soon as he said this, he froze in his tracks at what he saw. Then, looking at the fight, Kim Seong-han thought, "It's just amazing. A battle between two S-classes. Against each other. Standing there, not knowing how he could stop the fight. Kim Seong-han thought, I can't even muster the courage to come closer, let alone speak." While Kim Seong-han was thinking about what to do, he heard Han Yoo-jin exclaim from behind him saying, "Oh my God, damn it." And then, seeing the world and drawing attention to himself, he continued irritably, "Is it true that we have a couple of people here who have set up a private sparring room in the dungeon? I never would have guessed." Hearing Han Yoo-jin say that, Moon Hyuna approached him and said, "Are you awake already, Youngnim?" He exclaimed irritably, "Didn't I make myself clear? What is wrong with you?" When the girl approached Yoo-jin, he grabbed her arm and exclaimed in anger, "Ah, look at that! You almost burned your sleeve." To which she replied in confusion, "It's not that bad." She ran away from Yoo-jin and stood next to Sung-hyun and heard, "Seriously, how old are you? 5? What if you hurt yourselves fighting with each other?" Hearing this, the girl whispered to Sung-hyun, "You're right about him. There's definitely something about him." Looking at Han Yoo-jin, who was fearlessly reprimanding them for their thoughtless actions, she thought, "He doesn't seem to know what fear is at all." Standing in front of the two fighters, Han Yoo-jin spoke to them in a stern voice. Besides, aren't guild leaders supposed to set an example? As Han Yoo-jin continued to scold Moon Hyuna and Song Hyun-jae, he shouted at them, "Don't you know that the dungeons are full of danger?" No sooner had he said this than he felt a very strong tremor that shook the whole earth. Then Yoo-jin cried out in fright, "What was that?" As soon as he said that, he saw a message from the system that read, "Escape. There has been a dimensional disturbance." When he saw this message, he said in displeasure, "Great. Now what?" As he said this, Han Yoo-jin felt a severe pain in his head and clutched his head and groaned. Seeing that Yoo-jin was beginning to fall over, Kim Sung caught him and said in concern, "Are you okay, sir?" Han Yoo-jin regained consciousness and took his hand away from his face and said in embarrassment, "Just like I said, the dungeons are full of dangerous surprises." Feeling these tremors, Han Yoo-jin, climbing on his mirror, shouted loudly to everyone, "Run, everyone! Run as far as you can!" Looking around, everyone saw that the dungeon had begun to collapse, and the stone towers were crumbling. Upon noticing this, Sun Myung-han exclaimed in confusion, "What is happening?" Then noticing that some of the rocks from the earthquake were flying at them, he used his shield skill and shouted, "Watch out! Follow me!" Being on his pet and under Sung-han's protection, Yoo-jin's fear resistance skill was activated, and he suddenly called out, "Where are you, Hyun and Arim?" Hearing these words, Arim and Han Yoo-jin, who had just arrived, said, "You guys better get out of here, right now." Hearing this, Moon Hyuna exclaimed in confusion, "What's going on? An earthquake?" Hearing Moon Hyun, say this, Park Arim, noticing the change in the terrain, suddenly exclaimed, "No, where you are standing!" Noticing that the soil layer was collapsing beneath them, the girl added in an alarmed voice, "Something is rising from the ground." After briefly explaining what was happening, Miss Arim shouted loudly to all her friends who were there, "Get out of there!" As Moon Hyun-ah ran away from the earthquake site, she looked back to see what was happening and exclaimed, "What the hell is going on here?" As she said this, she saw a giant lizard crawling out of the ground in front of her and exclaimed, "You've got to be kidding me! What the hell is this?" But a little later, when the monster had completely emerged from the ground, it became clear that it was a stone frog, most likely the boss of this dungeon. Looking at this giant, Moon Hyun said in awe, "This is a monster? I've never seen anything like it." To which Han Yoo-hyun replied, "This big? Are you sure it's a monster?" Looking at the giant that had just emerged from the ground and stood in front of them in its entirety, Han Yoo-jin said in fright, "It's definitely a monster." Good. Using his promising sprout skill, Yoo-jin spoke to his comrades. "It's Bebar, the mountain eater, a first-class giant monster frog." After saying this and giving the basic information, Han Yoo-jin then added, "It's a mega-giant SS-class monster whose body is completely covered in impenetrable rocks." Looking at the monster that appeared before them, Han Yoo-jin exclaimed in confusion, "But this is only an A-class dungeon. What's something like this doing here?" Looking at Han Yoo-jin, guild leader Jupiter said thoughtfully, "Undoubtedly, he predicted it." Shifting his gaze to the giant monster, Song Hyun-jae also thought in astonishment, if it wasn't just a coincidence. Meanwhile, somewhere near the Abyssal Guild, Han Yoo-jin's room was in a real mess. Having left their pets to the girl, they didn't stop running amok. Pulling a towel over his head, but not seeing anything at all, Blue ran to the apartment. Noticing this, the girl exclaimed in confusion, "No, Blue, stop playing with the towels." As soon as she took the towel away from Blue's head, she heard Squeaky cry out to get her attention. Hearing this, the girl said, "Who knew babysitting monsters would be so—" "Huh?" Seeing Squeaky standing at the door and pointing at it, the girl let him in and said in surprise, What is it, Squeaky? Do you want to go to your father's room? He's not here. Running into Han Yu-jin's room, Squeaky started looking around nervously, trying to find Jin. Then she spoke to him. Don't cry. He'll be back tomorrow. Hey, Blue, not again. Not seeing Han Yu-jin in front of him, Squeaky bellowed loudly to attract attention, or perhaps for something else. While running around the room and making noise, Squeaky had accidentally used his Dimensional Lord L skill without realizing it. As he did so, a portal began to appear in front of the chick, and its owner was seen sitting on a fiery lion, looking very frightened. But the next moment, the whole process was disrupted, because Blue fell on Squeaky, who was running away from the warden who was left to watch the monsters, and it so happened that he landed on the chick. Running into the room where Squeaky had been, the girl taught the chick, who was lying unconscious on the floor, and Blue, who was lying next to him, shouting happily. But because of this incident, the portal dissipated, and no one noticed it. Meanwhile, in the A-class dungeon where Han Yu-jin and his friends were mooching around to upgrade Kim Sung-han, something terrible happened. A giant frog that had crawled out of the ground began to be active after its long sleep. When Moon Hyun-ah saw that such a fearsome monster had appeared in the A-class dungeon, she said to Han Yu-jin in confusion, "This is only an A-class dungeon. What's a dirty monster like that doing here?" Watching this giant frog move slowly, moving its giant legs, she added, "Can we even fight this thing? At least it looks slow enough." As soon as the girl said this, the giant frog took its first step. Stepping on the ground, the monster caused a considerable earthquake and destroyed the landscape beneath it. Seeing that even though it was very slow, it could cause such damage with its ordinary actions, the girl exclaimed in alarm, "Damn it! She only took one step and was able to do this much damage?" Seeing how formidable the enemy was, Park Aram shouted to her comrades in alarm, "Let's use our gate stones and escape from here." To which Yujin answered her, "No, we can't just leave her like that." Hearing this suggestion from Park Aram, Han Yu-jin rejected her offer and began to recall a similar event that happened to him in the past future. Actually, it happened a few years later in the original version of the world, in the countryside of China. Recalling exactly what happened that time, and how much trouble the frog's presence caused the population, Yu-jin continued his train of thought. The frog caused catastrophic damage just by moving slowly from place to place. Looking at his older brother, who had realized that it was necessary to exterminate this threat here and now, Yu-jin thought, "Worse yet, this dungeon is open right in front of the college's downtown galley. If it breaks through, it could destroy the whole neighborhood." As Han Yu-hyun prepared to fight, he confidently spoke to all of his comrades, who were in the same predicament as him. "I guess we'll have to do our best then." After using his blue willow skill to move through the air efficiently and reach the enemy, Han Yu-hen called out to his old brother, "Stay away from here, Yu-jin." Following her leader, Park Aram didn't take long to follow, and before she left them, she also added, "Sung-han, please take care of him." Yu-jin exclaimed in concern. Wait!" Aiming her spear at the enemy they needed to defeat, Park Aram said, "The icy breath of the A-class and the pale rain of the S-class won't even leave a scratch on this giant SS-class monster." Having said this, and having drawn such disappointing conclusions for herself, the girl suddenly changed her tactics and plan of action, and exclaimed, "But a day without a shadow is a completely different matter. I'm going to put SS boost on my mana and fire skills." After using her day without a shadow skill and immobilizing the enemy by absorbing his shadow, the girl drove her spear into the ground and told Han Yu-hyun, "I have done all this for you, Chairman. The rest is up to you." Hearing these words from Park Aram and seeing a chance to attack, Han Yu-hyun concentrated his strength in his hand and struck the giant monster with a fireball, hoping to do some damage. Standing near the battlefield and watching his chairman fight, Kim Seong-han said in awe, "SS-class Black Flame! That should be enough!" Also watching his brother fight, Yu-jin shouted out to him, "Hit the back of her neck! That's her weak spot!" His brother immediately followed his advice, and he was already at the neck of this formidable enemy, swinging his sword and preparing to strike. Then Yu-jin thought, "I already know how to kill her, especially with a team like this, where we have the perfect combination of skills." The next moment, after approaching the enemy and completing all the preparations, Han Yu-hyun struck the giant frog's neck, but the effect was not enough to win. He managed to make only a small cut. Continuing to strike one after the other, Han Yu-hen tried to do as much damage as possible while he had the opportunity. As Han Yu-jin watched, he thought, "The only thing is, we're still in that moment 5 years earlier." After thinking about it, Yu-jin continued, "They didn't have an extra 5 years to get better equipment, better performance, and more combat experience." Realizing that his attacks were not having the desired effect, Yu-hyun sighed in frustration. Hearing Han Yu-jin's instruction, Moon Hyun-ah, approaching the frog's weak point, loudly called out to Han Yu-hyun as she prepared to strike, "Out of the way, young master! The back of the neck, you mean? Van shots are my specialty. As she drove her spear into the monster's neck, Moonhyun also realized that it would not be easy to break the monster's skin and said in frustration, "Grandpa, this is going to be really hard." Huh? Looking at his comrade's unsuccessful attempts to hurt the giant frog, Han Yu-jin heaved a heavy sigh as he stood at a distance from the monster and thought of a plan of action. Worst of all, seeing that her attack that had cracked the monster's carapace was beginning to take longer, she exclaimed in surprise, "That!" Hearing these exclamations, Han Yu-jin said, "Babar can heal almost instantly." Running over to Sung-hyun and using his skill, Moon-hyun-ah exclaimed in exasperation, "Ah, if only I had an SS-class spear! I could make it into a sieve! I think I'll get your SS-grade chains." After creating his electric chains that emitted lightning, Sung-hyun spoke to the girl in a thoughtful tone. "What if we can't pierce her skin?" Jumping up and wrapping his electric chains around the frog monster, Sung-hyun used his skill to strike the monster with lightning and shouted, "How about this?" Han Yu-jin, watching the monster with his hand over the blinding light from the lightning, thought, "Insanity! Even the head of Jupiter can't destroy this beast alone." Watching Song Hyun-jae's actions, Kim Sung-han, who was standing next to Han Yu-jin, said in confusion, "Oh, did it work? It seems that Babar reacted for the first time." After this attack by the Jupiter Guild leader, the monster frog began to behave more actively, jumping forward, destroying a large area in front of it, and shaking the ground. After jumping a few times and breaking free of Sung-hyun's chains, the monster calmed down, landing on the ground and destroying a large amount of landscape beneath it. Barely able to stand up from the earthquake, the guild leader Jupiter spoke to his comrades. "I don't think we should make this monster angry by making it jump like that again." Hearing Song Hyun-jae say that, Moon-hyun-ah got to her feet and said in irritation, "Well, do you have any ideas on how to finish her off in one punch? Look at her. She's fully recovered again." Watching the monster move, Moon-hyun-ah said in frustration, "How are we supposed to finish off this beast?" Ignoring Moon-hyun-ah's words, Han Yu-jin tried to lead his brother out of the dungeon, saying, "You should leave. It's getting too dangerous." Hearing his brother's suggestion that he leave the dungeon so that he wouldn't get hurt, Han Yu-jin replied in a displeased tone, "No, listen. We can still defeat her if you two work together." After saying this, Han Yu-jin, who was sitting on the world, spoke while looking at the monster enemy. "Simply using skills one after another won't break through its skin. Our best chance is to launch a series of attacks and hit the weak spot on its neck." After proposing this plan to defeat this giant monster, Han Yu-jin looked at Park Aram, who was standing next to him, and said, "Let's start with you, Aram. Freeze the back of your neck." Hearing Han Yu-jin's instruction, Park Aram said in surprise, "Huh? Me?" Han Yu-jin then turned his head toward his younger brother and said, "And right after that, Han Yu-hyun's warmth." Hearing this plan of action from Yu-jin, Park Aram said in surprise, "Oh, I get it. It's like a cold glass cup that might crack if you pour hot water into it, right?" Han Yu-hyun then added, "So we're going to weaken it by changing the temperature?" Hearing these words from his comrades, who understood what the boy was trying to tell them, Yu-jin replied, "Exactly. This is the most effective way to deal with her stony skin." Hearing such a well-thought-out plan of action, Song Hyun, impressed by the strategy, said to Yu-jin, "Does such good awareness go hand in hand with your skill as a beast master?" Yu-jin replied, "Well, I guess you could say that." After answering Sung Hyun, Han Yu-jin climbed back on his pet and spoke to the head of the Destroyer Guild. "And then you, Hyun-ah?" Hearing this order, the girl replied in confusion, "Wait a minute. Do you really think that will work?" After saying this, the girl added in an embarrassed tone, "You saw how quickly that monster recovers. It will be healed before we can launch another attack. What if we miss the timing by even a little bit? Besides, we haven't been working as a team for a long time." Expressing her concern about the implementation of this plan, she also added, "We can't practice either, unless you just want to see this thing jump again. We don't have telepathy either." Hearing these comments on his plan, Han Yu-jin spoke confidently, "What if I say it's possible?" Hearing Han Yu-jin say that, Moon-hyun-ah and Song-hyun both stared in surprise and then said together, "What?" Han Yu-jin looked at the surprised hunters and said, "You're right, Moon-hyun. The most important thing is to launch a series of attacks at the perfect moment. But that means you have to work as a unit." After saying this, Han Yu-jin added, looking for his new skill, "Otherwise, this whole plan becomes impossible. But fortunately for us, I can make it possible for you." As Han Yu-jin spoke these loud words, he thought, "Something like an attacking skill would be much better. But I cannot ask for more in this situation." Then he said, "Now, I'm going to use my skill." After saying these words and warning everyone that he was going to use his skill on them, Han Yu-jin spoke in confusion in his head as he looked at her. a skill that I just happened to acquire yesterday. Standing in the midst of his comrades who would need to destroy this monster, Yu-jin spoke. Yesterday, I obtained a special teamwork skill. It should come out to improve your interaction. Hearing these words from his older brother, Han Yu-hyun said to him in surprise, You learned a new skill? To which Yu-jin replied with a disgruntled look at his system window. Yes, I guess I was able to meet the conditions to unlock it. Considering his new skill, which he needed to use to create a more coordinated teamwork between all these thinkers, Han Yu-jin thought, at least now the skill description is more detailed. Rereading the skill description, which said, Terrifying Chicken Commander, SS, a teacher who controls stubborn awakened ones. Kids are so naughty, aren't they? Don't worry, if you use this skill, you can unite several objects of influence, teach them to work in harmony, and coordinate their actions. After reading this description of the skill, Han Yu-jin thought in surprise, Is it just me, or has the writing style changed as well? First of all, the skill depends on the intelligence level and the amount of mana of the target. After rereading the first paragraph of the description, Han Yu-jin took out a mana potion to replenish his supply, and after drinking one bun, he said, Yu-hyun, come closer to Aram. And then he continued reading the description. The second paragraph read, Second, the caster may take damage if the target rejects the synchronization attempt. Then he said, Now I'm going to use this skill. You need to accept it. This is important, understand? Standing in the middle, Park Aram and Han Yu-hyun noticed that they were covered by a blue seal, their bodies covered with a strange hue. Just at that moment, Yu-jin's Terrifying Chicken Commander skill was being used. After using his skill on Park Aram and his younger brother, they successfully accepted the synchronization with their bodies, and Han Yu-jin was able to unite with them. Feeling quite unusual and not natural to him after synchronizing with his comrades, he said in surprise, Uh-oh. Feeling some strange control over the synchronized hunters, Han Yu-jin waved his hand to test the skill and thought in amazement, I can feel their bodies. While testing the Terrifying Chicken Commander skill that had been imposed on his comrades, Yu-jin continued to test it with basic movements and said, As if it were my own. Thinking about how this was interesting and how this skill worked, Han Yu-jin said, It's as if I know in advance what they want to do. Standing next to Han Yu-jin, Yu-hyun looked at his hand, which had risen involuntarily, and Yu-jin thought, I know what they're going to say, even if they haven't realized it yet. And then Yu-hyun spoke. Well, I don't feel... Hearing this phrase from his younger brother, Han Yu-jin interrupted him, saying, No difference? Hearing these words from his elder brother, Yu-heng looked at him in confusion, not understanding how he had guessed what he was going to say. Hearing these words from his elder brother, Han Yu-heng said in surprise, Hey, what just happened? To which Yu-jin joyfully replied, Excellent, now I will try to synchronize the two of you. With that, Han Yu-jin divided the synchronization skill between his younger brother and Park Aram so that they could sense and anticipate each other. When the synchronization was successful, Han Yu-jin, feeling what Yu-jin was feeling, said in surprise, Wow. To which Aram added, Damn, this is both cool and creepy. Seeing Park Im and Han Yu-hyun's strange reactions, Moon Hyun-ah said in surprise, What? What happened? And then, while holding the spear and looking at her body, Im felt something unusual. After receiving such sensations, she said in astonishment, It feels as if the head's body has become part of my own. I can even predict his movements and balance our strength. As soon as she said this, she swung her spear toward Han Yu-hyun and exclaimed, That's it! Shielding herself from the gust of wind after the blow, Moon Hyun, standing next to Yu-jin, said in surprise, What the? When the dust settled back to the ground and it was possible to see exactly what had happened, the leader of the Destroyer Guild exclaimed in shock, The spearhead is perfectly close to the sword! As she said this, she added, still puzzled and amazed by the situation, And they did it without even blinking an eye. How is that possible? Marveling at this effect, Moon Hyun-ah happily spoke to Yu-jin, pointing at herself. Hey, do it to me! Come on! Hearing this, Han Yu-jin was just drinking a mana potion to replenish his mana supply. As Han Yu-jin finished his mana potion, he spoke to the lucky girl. Give me a second. I need to recover. Your role is to destroy the frog's skin as soon as Yu-hyun does what he needs him to do. You will be able to minimize the damage from the fire as long as you hold on tight to Mir's back. Hearing Yu-jin say that, the girl exclaimed happily, jumping up and down with joy. I get to ride Mir? Yay! How did you know that I brought a saddle just in case? And even fire-resistant equipment. Hearing these words, Mir was a little upset, so Yu-jin, patting him on the head, said conscientiously, I'm sorry, my friend. Just this once, huh? He then spoke to Moon Hyun. Please take care of Mir. And I have something else for you. Hearing Han Yu-jin say that, the girl was surprised to hear him say that. What is it? Then Yu-jin thought, The skill is easier to use on the targets I take under my wing with a code word. After thinking about this, Han Yujin said to Moon Hyuna with a sweet smile, "My heart, Hyuna, I love you." After he said this, he thought, "I will take this chance and make her my student." As he thought about it, Yujin continued his train of thought until he saw what happened after he said it. "I think we've become close enough that I can get out of this situation by joking around." After saying this, Moon Hyun was overwhelmed. She had a critical failure, and she was thinner. Seeing this, Yujin added in embarrassment, I mean, I'm really grateful for everything you've done for us." After saying this, Yujin also added to get out of this ridiculous situation, "Coming with us, and so on? You were so kind to me even when I kept yelling at you, and that's why." Hearing these words from Yujin, the girl smiled and replied, "Ha ha, that was so silly. But don't worry, your attitude helped me remember how hard I was trained when I was an athlete." Hearing this, Yujin saw a notification. "Moon Hyuna has responded to the code word and has become your student." Yujin was relieved. "Good. I guess I did it after all." Turning to Moon Hyun, Han Yujin said happily, "Well, then we need to—" But at that moment, he was interrupted by Song Hyun Yu, who said, "It should be my turn now." Hearing this, Yujin thought in confusion, Ugh, this is definitely a tough nut to crack." Determined not to waste any time, Han Yujin immediately spoke up and said to Sung Hyun, "Did I mention that I love you too, sir? Just like you, Hyun?" To which he replied in embarrassment, "After all we've been through, you shouldn't call me sir." Hearing this response from Sung Hyun, Yujin added, "Oh, that's right, I love you, Hyunjae." After a few seconds, Yujin, not seeing the result, thought, "Just as I imagined, the code word doesn't work on him yet." After finishing his thoughts and holding out his hand to Sung Hyun, Yujin said, "All right then, please don't reject my skill." As soon as he used his skill on Sung Hyun, felt the jolt and saw a notification. "The target has rejected your skill." Feeling the pain of rejection that was described in the skill's description, Ha Yujin writhed in pain and moaned heavily. Noticing this, Song Hyun said, "Oh my." After a few seconds, Han Yujin raised his head and looked at Sun Hyun and said angrily, "I told you not to do that." He replied with a sly smile, "Just a little bit of a refusal, that's all." Hearing Sung Hyun's response, Yujin thought in frustration, "Damn!" Seeing this, Han Yu-hyun ran over to his brother and said in alarm, "What happened? Hyun, are you okay?" Hearing this, Yujin spoke to his brother in irritation, "It's fine. I only need one assistant." To make it up to him, Song Hyun threw his cloak over him and said, "Hey, maybe this will help you stay safe." Watching this whole situation and feeling each of his students who were affected by the effect, Yujin thought, "I'm getting visual information from 4 S-class hunters, and it's hard to handle. It's like I'm some kind of hub or filter or a teacher trying to stage a school play with unruly preschoolers. Maybe if I close my eyes, it will be better." Closing his eyes, Yujin called out, "Hurry up. I'm not sure I'll be able to last much longer." After saying this, Yujin thought wearily, "I know, right now we should be worrying about the SS-class monster. But our first task is to make Sung-han an S-class." Thinking about it, Han Yujin let Kim Sung-han do at least some damage to the monster. Even if his attack doesn't hurt the enemy but just affects it, Yujin thought. That's why he should strike first. After he thought this, Kim Sung-han, who was standing on the edge of the cliff, pulled the bowstring of his bow and shot an arrow directly at the giant monster, so that his participation in the battle with this monster would also count, and he could level up. When she noticed that the first stage was already over and Kim Seong-han had shot his bow, Park Aram said without a trace of doubt, "Yes, I expected that there wouldn't even be a scratch on it." After saying this, and rushing into the battle with the monster, Park Aram exclaimed loudly as she prepared to perform the second stage. "But since the first attack has already been made, it's up to me." As she approached the enemy's neck, where its weak point was located, Park Aram shouted loudly, "Mana characteristic enhancement!" Immediately freezing in midair, Park Aram began to create an icy blizzard around her, saying, "And I will bind it together with—" Using her skill, she noticed, Ice Breath activated. Swinging her spear, which she wanted to strengthen to make her attack as effective as possible, as she might not have another chance, she shouted, "I will concentrate all the cold energy into one point!" Raising her spear upwards so that all the power would go straight into her weapon, she added, "I will make my spear even thicker and even sharper as much as possible." Having accomplished her task, she used the Hermes shoes skill and exclaimed loudly, "He's completely frozen and ready. Now it's up to you, Chairman." Hearing this announcement from Park Aram, who had done her part, Han Yu-hyun, who was already preparing to complete his part of the plan to destroy the monster, approached her. Gathering all of his flames in his hand, Han Yujin, having approached a sufficient distance to hit the target, launched his fireball right at the target to destroy its defenses. After his attack on the frozen spot on the monster's neck, somewhere in the distance from Han Yujin, Aram's shocked voice could be heard saying, "Wow, it melted in a second." Marveling at Han Yu-hyun's previously unseen strength, Park Aram added in awe, "I've never seen this before. How powerful is this heat?" Han Yu-jin, who was standing next to her, said heavily, "I can barely breathe because of all the sensory information." And as the second stage was also completed, Moon Hyun-ah, who was preparing to perform the third stage, the success of which depended on her, exclaimed, "Don't worry, I'm strong enough to handle the flames." As she approached the giant monster with a fierce smile, Moon Hyun-ah was already preparing to deliver a devastating blow, exclaiming, "I need to hit this thing while its shell is still soft, right? Right now is a great chance." Looking at Moon Hyun-ah, who had almost reached the monster, Han Yu-hyun thought anxiously, Hyun-ah is right in saying that the shell is currently in a vulnerable state, but realizing how dangerous and powerful its attack was, and how it hadn't been able to dissipate even after a long period of time, Han Yu-hang thought, "It's not time yet. It's still a little while." As his flames slowly began to dissipate, heating up the frog's shell, Yu-hang continued his train of thought. "We need to wait until the flames have not diminished to an acceptable level." Thinking about how much longer it would take for Moon Hyun-ah's attack to be most effective, after Yu-hyun's and Aram's combo, Han Yu-hyun added, "But by the time the skin starts its healing process," trying to plan everything precisely so that their plan would not fail due to a small problem, Han Yu-jin, watching the whole process through his skill, grabbed his head and said to himself, "Come on, think." Starting to calculate all the parameters in his head, which was already heavily loaded due to the skill and the control of so many people at the same time. Yu-jin began to go over everything in his head, trying to come up with the most effective plan of action. Han Yu-jin thought, Mir's speed, Han-ah's agility, the heat from the remaining flame that passes through Han's senses, and the final moment when Hyun-jae's song must come into play. Thinking about all these points that needed to be taken into account in his planning, Han Yu-jin didn't realize that he was starting to fall off his feet. Sung-hyun caught him, preventing him from falling to the ground. When he saw the Jupiter leader supporting him, Yu-jin said in surprise, "What's going on?" To which he replied, "Isn't it time for us to leave? I think I can figure it out when it's my turn. Just concentrate on Hyun-ah for now." After saying these words to Yu-jin, Song-hyun also added, "This is my way of apologizing for my disobedience." Hearing this explanation, Yu-jin leaned on his assistant as he wiped the blood under his nose, which had been released from the overload on his body. Leaning on Song-hyun-ji, Han Yu-jin said in a relieved, joyful voice, "Wow, you could definitely become a teacher's favorite. Hold on tight. We need physical contact to share the skill." As Han Yu-jin watched his pet, with Moon Hyun-ah riding on top of it, preparing for the moment to strike the monster, he thought, finding the perfect moment. As he watched the girl's actions and made calculations to figure out the best time to strike the monster as soon as the opportunity arose, Yu-jin spoke. "Considering the speed, the distance, and how much time is left before the flames die out, after calculating each option, the perfect moment, now," having given the order to attack as soon as the moment presented itself, Han Yu once again plunged into his distant memories, recalling the early days, in the very first days of breaking through the dungeon. After saying this in his head, Han Yu-jin continued, recalling the chaos that was happening on the streets of his city. The beasts left a trail of destruction in our world, but lucky for us, most of the monsters were low class. Recalling how it all started when the gate to the dungeon first appeared, Yu-jin said in his head, but as time went on, with the harder dungeons, more and more formidable opponents began to appear. Thinking back to the days when the strong S-class hunters were really very strong and could defeat most of the monsters that came into their world, Yu-jin said in his head, and although the S-class hunters could initially handle clearing the dungeon alone, all of these memories were related to obtaining his new terrifying chicken commander skill. It was then that he thought, it didn't take long before they realized that they should unite for a chance to win, thinking that there was still a way to unite the warring S-classes, each of which believes itself to be the strongest. Yu-jin thought. And it was at this time that I learned this special teamwork skill. Imagining himself as someone like Ratatouille from the cartoon, who leads the strong, Han Yu-jin thought, if a person of your own strength tries to control your thoughts and body, all you will feel is aggression and rejection. Seeing how happy Moon Hyun was at the Worlds, Yu-jin continued his train of thought. But what if it's some F-ranked babe? It must feel much more innocent. And as a result, we were able to conduct the first coordinated attack by S-classes. Meanwhile, Moon Hyun-ah, who had heard Han Yu-jin's order that now was the best chance to attack, rode Han Yu-jin's pet toward the huge frog monster. As she approached the monster, swinging her mighty spear to deliver a crushing blow as long as the situation and opportunity allowed, she shouted, "Let us take advantage of the chance we have been given. No sooner had she said this than her spear stuck in the monster's neck, destroying a lot of the rocky skin on the surface of the monster's neck so that she could continue her task of destroying her opponent. When Park Aram, who had been standing to the side of the frog so as not to interfere with the others, saw many rocks flying from its back, she exclaimed in amazement, "It's incredible! She really did it!" Looking at the monster that had had its layer of protection around its neck pierced, Han Yu-hyun, noticing that Moon Hyun-ah had returned to them after successfully completing her Aston task, said, "The flames must still be burning." At the same time, blood gushed out of the monster's neck, signaling that the protective rocky layer of its hard armor had been pierced. And it was only a matter of time before it was finished off with a strong attack on the soft flesh. As Song Hyun-jae approached the spot where the protective layer of skin had been destroyed, he held Han Yu-jin in his arms and said, "Looks like it's time for me to join in." Hearing Song Hyun-jae preparing for his attack, Han Yu-jin closed his eyes and gritted his teeth to make himself less afraid for his life, and said confidently, "Don't worry about me. I'll use the bracelet so you don't need to hold back." After covering his face with his hand, and using the effect of the bracelet to absorb all damage for the next 10 minutes, Han Yu-jin, noticing that Sung Hyun was already preparing, said, "To the Aram strengthening." After saying this, Han Yu-jin used another of his F-class veteran skills, which was also supposed to affect the outcome of the battle, and thought, "We'll add something else to the attack." After using another skill that was supposed to affect the outcome of the battle, Han Yu-jin, who was tightly clinging to the leader of the Jupiter Guild, thought anxiously, double damage with an attacking skill. Being directly under this barrage of Song Hyun-ji's incredibly powerful attack, Han Yu-jin, although he was wearing a damage bracelet, still felt difficult, and he spoke, "Such overwhelming power." At the same time, Song Hyun-ji was completely absorbed in the process, thinking only of one thing, how to use all his manifest power and put it into an ode to attack to defeat this giant. The next moment, everyone could see this incredible sight of many lightning bolts hitting a single target and piercing the monster through. After completing his powerful attack, in which Song Hyun-jae put all his strength and skills, it became clear that the monster was defeated, because the hole that formed in the monster did not guarantee survival. Seeing what happened to the monster after Sung Hyun-jin's attack, Park Yeon-rim exclaimed in amazement at what their teamwork had accomplished. We won?" Before she could say it, fragments of the frog's skin fell off the rocks, which began to crumble after the monster's death, as it could no longer hold on to its back. Noticing this danger, Yu Heng exclaimed, "Ah, watch out for the debris." Seeing what was happening, Kim Seong-han, who was the only one with a shield, ran in front of his comrades, shielded them with his body, and exclaimed, "Quickly run away from here." Hearing Song-han say this, Aram exclaimed in confusion, "Mr. Kim?" While using his skill to create a shield, Kim Sung-han noticed a system notification informing him that he had successfully leveled up. Conditions for leveling up have been met. This system notification was immediately followed by another that said, Kim Seong-han's characteristics and skills have been upgraded. After that, Kim Seong-han's shield became much larger. It could not be called a shield, but a protective dome that covered a large area, protecting him from unwanted entry into the middle of anything. When Park Aram saw a huge barrier suddenly appear around them, preventing rock fragments from entering the middle, she exclaimed in amazement, "Wow! What was that? That was incredible, Mr. Kim!" After surviving this incredibly powerful attack from Sung-han, sharing his power with him, and controlling a large number of S-classes in synchronization for such a long time, Han Yu-jin spoke heavily. All of this, and then, gradually losing consciousness and clutching his forehead, Yu-jin said wearily, "Ah, I have no strength left. Hey, I'm going to take a nap now. Try not to quarrel during this time while I..." After that, the monster also collapsed and lay there without any sign of life. And so, the SS-class monster was defeated thanks to the first-ever coordinated attack by the S-classes that was successful. And although Han Yu-hyun's skill to synchronize the hunters ended as soon as he lost consciousness, the emotional connection remained. And so, after successfully completing the mission, Moon Hyun joyfully headed to Mir. Throwing her arms around him, she said happily, "You're the best, Mir. Who's a good cat?" "You are. Yes, you are." "Maybe you will come to live with me, huh? You're such a good boy." Or is it a girl? Looking at Moon Hyun-ah's frank behavior, the way she was treating Mir, Han Yu-hyun, and Park Aram, who were looking at her, thought, it seems that suddenly facing a terrifying opponent that you had to spend all your energy on is liberating. Looking at Han Yu-hyun, Park Aram said in surprise, We did it." They clumsily tried to shake hands, but were unable to do so, exclaiming in joy, "We really managed to destroy the SS-class beast." After this awkward moment of almost shaking hands, Park Aram and Han Yu-hyun walked in opposite directions, and yet fighting back-to-back created a bond even between those who disliked each other. Meanwhile, Kim Sung-han, who had completed his mission to protect all of his comrades, quickly went to Song Hyun to see if his master was okay. Running up to Han Yujin, who was with the Jupiter Guild leader, Kim Sung-han shouted out in alarm, "Mr. Song, Mr. Han Yujin is fine." Before he could finish his sentence, Kim Sung-han saw a horrifying scene of Kim Sung-han holding an unconscious Han Yujin in his arms and looking at him with a glorious expression. And so, after this incident, many different things happened. Some people were able to fulfill their long-held desire by riding a beast, and others were able to fully enjoy the feeling of doubling their strength. But these feelings were strange. They changed Sun Hyung's mind a lot. He looked at his hands and realized with sincere pleasure that such power could always belong only to him. Meanwhile, somewhere in the center of the system administrators, chaos was happening. After defeating this enormous SS-class monster, one of the administrators shouted out in alarm, "No doubt this creature has followed Yujin." Staring at his screen and scanning through the various information, the administrator exclaimed in confusion, "The measurements have suddenly become distorted. This beast should have appeared in 5 years. I thought we had prevented such cases." Hearing such frightened exclamations from her employee, the administrator, who looked like a mermaid, said, "Will it take long to recover?" To which another administrator replied, "Wait, it's just a little bit longer." Continuing to panic over the situation, the administrator, the lamb, exclaimed in alarm, "Do you think they are responsible? The weirdos who are obsessed with their son's debt?" He was answered, "Calm down, I don't think so." Looking back at his frightened and panicking friend, the system administrator spoke to him. "The attempt was made from the sweet spot, and those oars work from the outside." Hearing this explanation from her colleague, the mermaid administrator spoke to the lamb administrator. "Someone in his world tried to use the teleportation skill to get to the sweets." Hearing these words from his boss, the sheep administrator thoughtfully said, "But who could do such a thing? Someone with at least SSS-class skills, or even legendary skills." Having calmed down his panicking administrator sheep, he looked back at the computer to look for information about who could have done this, and said in surprise, "Look, we're getting the picture again." Hearing this notification, the administrator with the leaves in his hair said, "Uh-oh, looks like they've already beaten Babar so fast. I thought they would play with him longer. We need to make sure they get the rewards they deserve." Hearing these words from her employee, the administrator came to the screen and said, "Well, let's see. What? I think something strange is going on here. Something is definitely wrong." Looking at the unconscious Han Yujin, who had fainted after such a hard fight with the S-class monster, Song Hyunjae said ominously, "Who are you? I mean, really?" Thinking back to the skills Han Yujin had revealed to them at the first meeting of the leaders, Song Hyun thought, "If the Beastmaster skill is the only thing he has to offer, I'll just have to wait until the end of the contract." As he thought about this, Song Hyun-jae also began to think in other directions, because this was not the only thing that surprised him about the boy. But he's hiding something much more than he's telling. Not only did he talk, but he acted as if he knew what would happen in the dungeon. Thinking about this, looking at his hand, recalling that feeling of power, Seung Hyun continued. "But it was also a strange coincidence that I gained a command skill at such a good time. And besides that, a skill that doubles the damage he shared with me." As soon as the leader of the Jupiter Guild began to mention this doubling of damage and the power he had gained, a dark aura would immediately emanate from him, and his thoughts would be filled with such things. How can I forget the times when I had such power? As he thought about how powerful he could be if he had something like that, Seung Hyun thought, "But why is he human? If there were such a thing somewhere in the world, I would give absolutely everything to have it." Noticing that his brother hadn't returned for a long time, Han Yu-yan decided to go and check on him himself. Pulling his sword behind him, Yu-yan said menacingly when he saw Song Hyun, "Is my brother all right?" Seeing his leader's resolute attitude, Kim Seong-han spoke to him in concern. "Boss." As Yu-jin came closer and saw him lying unconscious on Song-han's shoulder, he said, "I'll take care of him." Hearing Han Yu-jin's younger brother say that, the leader of the Jupiter Guild spoke to him. "Perhaps you could leave him to me. I'll feed him 3 times a day and provide him with all the necessary care he